All right. Welcome to the first episode of the Forward Pass. So, this is a podcast where experienced technical AI entrepreneurs, the four of us, we talk shop about LLMs each month. This show is for anyone who's building with the latest AI tech and who really wants to push the boundaries of what's possible and really kind of extract the most you can out of the products that you're building. So each month we'll talk about the challenges we face building our products. We'll talk about technical developments that impact all of us as AI entrepreneurs and builders, and we'll each share our own unique perspective on where we think the industry is headed, any trends, any big kind of existential questions we have about how to build durable value in this space, which obviously is moving very quickly and has a lot of things happening So if you're someone who's building with LLMs hands-on and you want to get better at your craft, this is the show for you. And combined between the four of us, we have over 50 years of experience building software. So, we're not newbies. We know what we're doing, and all of us have entrepreneurship projects that we're working on kind of at the cutting edge. So this month, we will be talking about reasoning models in agents. We'll be talking about the failures of GPT 4.5 and kind of the underwhelming launch around that and what that means for the industry. We'll be talking about Claude 3.7, and then we'll also be talking about 11 Labs voice accuracy. Yeah, so let's kick off. So the first topic we want to talk about today is using reasoning models in agents, which I think is a new topic that a lot of people are thinking about right now. Dan, do you want to kick us off on that one?
And the first thing I want to say is when you talk about LLMs, that's already last year's paradigm. We're talking about LRMs, right? Large reasoning models. That's the future. So this is an LRM podcast, not an LLM podcast. And who knows what it'll be next year? I'm sure there'll be another letter that we'll all switch to. But yeah, so to introduce this topic, we had O1 preview in September of 2024. It was a very interesting model and sparked a lot of discussion about inference time compute and test time compute, a lot of things like that. And in the last 6 months, that has gone from a new idea to being pretty mainstream. And the expectation for new intelligences is that they are reasoning at inference time. Great. If you want to go and load up ChatGPT and switch to O1 or load up Claude and switch to Claude Sonnet 3.7 thinking instead of Claude Sonnet 3.7, great, go for it. It'll do something. It'll be slower and it'll be more intelligent. But a lot of the stuff that we were expecting out of LLMs, that we're now expecting out of LRMs, is not just one-shotting them. It's using them in agentic loops where they are doing things and interacting with the world. But the way that those thinking or reasoning models use agents, I think, is pretty undefined. I've only seen one good paper on this topic. So we basically have the cutting edge type of model, the reasoning model, and the cutting edge type of way of using a model, which is in an agent, not playing nicely with each other. And that kind of opens up a huge frontier for anybody who can figure out how to make that work.
So are you referring more to like tool use within like a reasoning model doing tool use, or am I misunderstanding what the core issue there is?
Yeah, I mean, generally an agentic architecture is for using tools, although not necessarily. But of course, the classic case are the deep research agents. I mean, ChatGPT has been an agent since the beginning, not the complete beginning, but for a long time now, where it's been able to do web search and use a Python REPL and do other various small things. It just does those things so incredibly quickly, it doesn't feel like an agent. Those of us that build with agents every day are used to them taking like 5 minutes to do anything. Now that the deep research tools are common, more people are getting used to the idea that, say, Perplexity, you just kind of switch a toggle. And now it will take 5 minutes. And mostly what it's doing is web searching, but in theory, it could be generating a data table or rendering, a pandas thing in Python or who knows what else. So I think when people think about agents and tool use, they generally think about web search. But of course, in a million enterprises all over the world today, there's a bunch of people whose agents are using like very narrow tools that are specific to that company or specific to that industry. And we don't see those very often because they're not in the, ChatGPT interface. So we generally see web research, but I think tool use more broadly is delivering on the original view when people first started talking about agent architectures way back in 2023, but not with reasoning models. It seems like people are still using raw LLMs for that type of thing. And if people can figure out a way to use reasoning models and give them tools, then good things will happen, presumably.
Have you seen any issues with that? I mean, when you just ask, say, for example, use the same exact prompt and just change the model and say how now it's DeepSeek R1 instead of Claude 3.7 not thinking. Like, how does that change the output? Because in my experience, it's succeeded in limited tests that I've done, like tool use has worked with reasoning models. They're still able to understand, like, okay, this is the interface I need to use, and I'm able to kind of, they may think about it for this. So there's a latency implication for sure. So anything that's low latency, I think, is impacted there. But like, are you seeing particular issues arise when you try to do that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny one. But I think actually latency alone is enough reason to completely rethink how these agents should work. Because this kind of 5-minute runtime of some deep research thing using an LLM. Although I don't know. I mean, OpenAI deep research is using O3, and they can go for like 20 minutes. It depends on the use case, right? Maybe 20 minutes doesn't bother you. Maybe you were never going to watch it in real time anyway. You were just going to go do something else, and it could take an hour for all you care. And as long as it works, it's fine.
Yeah.
5 minutes is kind of the rough time where, well, you maybe will just wait for it to finish. You'll kind of actually watch its stream of thoughts come out or watch what it's doing using its tools. So I think, if you just 5x the time of a 5-minute thing and make it 25 minutes, I think that is very significant for products, but it's not a deal breaker necessarily. So you're right, Tyler. You can simply say, all right, I'm just going to use my LRM and put it in the same agent loop and see what happens. I think there's two things. One, you're not getting a lot of the value out of the reasoning. So you should be able to do much better in the way that LRMs, when you're just one-shotting things, can solve all sorts of math and computer science problems that LLMs cannot. But there are some funny quirks. And again, it was hitting these quirks myself that made me realize that this isn't really explored very well, and then searching to see who had a solution to this and only finding one basically on the web, which I can mention. But
yeah, link that paper. We'll put the paper in the show notes. So definitely link that.
The example that I hit was quite funny. The core agents, there's many different agent architectures. There's at least 4 ones that I think are pretty well known, even again, since the early GPT-4 days. One of the most common ones you see in most papers is the React agent. The React agent has a observe, thought, act loop. And amusingly, one has been trained not to talk about its thoughts. And we actually discussed this in this group before it was a public podcast. And it was very frustrating that O1 was not saying what it was doing. It was kind of intentionally obfuscating what those thoughts were. And that was mostly kind of a mild annoyance. Like, it would be nice if you could see what it was doing, but instead wants to summarize its thoughts and not give you its kind of unadulterated thoughts. But amusingly, some of the prompts that we were using in a React loop, we're asking the thing, what is your thought? And it was actually refusing. It would basically say, I don't tell you what I'm thinking. And so even though the thought is a core part of the loop of, like, based on the observation, what are you concluding from this in order to decide what action to take next? It would just bork and die because it wouldn't tell you what its thoughts were. And we actually just kind of swapped it out. I don't think we have a good way of doing a thought type of thing. Now, I think that's very particular to O. That's not a failure mode you should expect to see with Claude Sonnet 3.7 thinking or Gemini 2.0 Flash thinking or whatever these R models are called.
The names are getting too long. Yeah, there's like 6 dashes in the name of each model.
Exactly. But I think that's
Michael,
an example of a problem. Not like that itself is not a big problem, but it just indicates that the way that you're trying to get the observations and thoughts and actions out of it is very much designed for LLMs. It's not designed for LRMs.
Yeah, so I think that's the... Oh, yeah, go ahead, Michael. Go.
Yeah, this is sort of my question to you, Dan. It's like, how would I, if I'm trying to figure out if this will help my prompt, like, do I know what's the difference between not using it versus running it for 1 minute, for 2 minutes, if I don't know what it's like trying to figure out?
Are you asking about agents more generally?
Agents are just like, well, like, what is the right way to think about these LRMs? Like, how do you get, like, value out of them?
Well, I'll tell you what I want them to do, because we have these agents powered by LLMs trying to do these tasks and failing. And then we're, tweaking things and trying to get them to pass so that we can produce useful utilities. And they get stuck at various points. They generally get stuck in a way that seems like should be conducive for a better reasoning model to not get stuck in that place. So, for example, you're looking for some data on the web, and there is a infographic. And a human looking at that infographic is just going to mouse the cursor over the thing, and a little pop-up is going to show up and have, like, the number, the data point that you were looking for. But a thing that's just kind of looking at the raw web can't read it because it doesn't have, dynamically rendered JavaScript such that hover state can work. Or if it does, it doesn't know that it should hover over that thing. And it will get stuck there and give up. There are ways around that problem. Like, there are things that you could do, other tools that the agent could use that would solve that, but it just doesn't think to do that, gives up and tries something else, and ends up not finding the important data point that any human in that situation would have found. You think if you give that exact same information to a reasoning model, it would have a higher chance of saying, oh, I should dynamically render the JavaScript, so I should use this other tool that will allow me to do this. Or even a simple thing of like, I should hover the mouse over this section of the infographic at this XY coordinate and actually have that succeed. That's an actual reasoning error. So if you gave that particular place to a reasoning model, you should expect it to do better than an LLM. And if you add up, 20 of these things where the LLM on each one has a 0.1% chance of, or sorry, a 10% chance of doing something stupid, it's never going to get all the way to the end doing things correctly. If you just swapped into LRM, maybe it would just make every single one of those decisions correctly and the task would flip from red to green.
That's not what we're seeing. So it's basically that there's a new paradigm, there's a new scaling law with this reasoning, but we're probably going to need new methodologies in order to fully leverage it. I think that makes sense. I think the question will just be who comes up with those methodologies for their particular use case fastest. And I think those people will see gains, to the degree that the problem they're solving is kind of product constrained rather than, say, for example, like distribution constrained or something else, marketing constrained. If their problem is product constrained, then I think best practices will arise within each company where they're like, hey, we fine-tuned a model. Like this mistake was so common in our use case that we just fine-tuned a model and gave it 10,000 examples of how to do that. And now we solved it, and it's kind of like it's jumping over hurdles. It's like whoever jumps over the 10 hurdles in the way between them and like the aha moment or the eureka moment, like that's my take, is that like you just kind of have to think of it as like, okay, what are the hurdles for my particular problem? And it's a new paradigm. But the great thing about DeepSeek R1 in particular being open source, open weights, is that you can fine tune it the same way that you would fine tune any other model. And so I think that opens up so many possibilities for developers to kind of, not just be like, well, the off the shelf model like just gets trapped on this hurdle, but it's like, okay, how can we help it solve that? That's the approach we've taken. We haven't yet fine-tuned DeepSeek R1, but we're planning to do so soon. And we understand how that's going to work. And we feel confident that like particular problems we're facing will get better with that type of fine-tuning. I think there's less difference between LLMs and LRMs than a lot of people think. Like they're fundamentally the same thing. They're just reinforced in a slightly different direction, where latency is no longer the goal, and the goal is not to just one shot. It's like, let me think and then say, oh, wait, what's wrong about that thinking? But like the fundamental intelligence is the same as like the base model. That's my mental model for these things. Anyways, Ray, I want to get you in on here. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
I was thinking about this paper that came up, and I'm still trying to digest this, but the paper is called Premise Order Matters in Reasoning with Large Language Models. And so they basically noticed a difference in terms of how you order different things. And I think the conclusion that I'm starting to see that I don't really know yet, but I still need to test, and maybe this can help other people who are trying to figure out how to use these things. It's like, is there a bias in the data that was used to train this thing? So like if they have thinking tokens that are for specific topics, and it is able to reason and get to that conclusion for specific areas of expertise, is that going to be much more helpful for certain domains? And then if you're doing some fine tuning, if you're able to generate these like reasoning paths to include into your like fine tuning, does that actually help your model get there faster? And I'm kind of thinking about it as like, our reasoning tokens just like a cache in some way that you kind of store as like a, this like type of runtime configuration. And so has me in my mind like expanding as far as like more questions than there is answers, and more testing. And so I'm just trying to think about how do I set up some evals for this type of thing, right? So like if I'm doing stuff in the domain where I'm extracting topics and trying to get some results like for code, how do I like test just one range of stuff, and I flip it around the other way? Because I noticed when I'm using Cursor with Claude Sonnet 3.7 thinking, the performance is really bad, and Cursor is basically grabbing context from different parts of my code, and they're shoving it into their own way of shoving it into the model. But when I use Claude Code, just the command line tool, it's really great. So clearly it's just like the way that you submit the information and whatever you have in the context seems to have different results, even though it's the same code base. Even though I would expect the reasoning and thinking to be getting there as fast as possible. But when I select the drop down of like DeepSeek R1 in Cursor, it performs really well. So I was just kind of perplexed right now. It's just kind of have more questions than I do have answers in my initial testing.
Yeah, I think that's
an interesting example. Sorry, real quick. I think it's an interesting example of Claude Code versus Cursor using Claude, the same model. It's like Claude Code was obviously built from the ground up with this use case in mind, whereas Cursor was built they started 2 years ago and there were no LRMs. And so it's kind of just shoehorning in an old paradigm. So I think that's actually a great example that I think people who are building products from the ground up with reasoning in mind will do better. That's not to say that old products can't integrate that. It's just they're going to have to think from first principles. Like there's a new guy in town and we have to like leverage his strengths rather than like the strengths of the old thing and just kind of like be like, oh yeah, that same technique will still work in this new paradigm. I don't think it will in general.
But I guess by extension, that argument is like there's going to be another newcomer to town that's going to like append everything again. So I think it's hard. I mean, you have to do something, right? But I think maybe like a better way to think about it is you just need to get it working good enough and then just hope that the next revision will just like make it even better. But it's interesting because that's not really what we see with like with some of these reasoning models, right? Like some of the results are worse, at least qualitatively.
Yeah, your example.
Dan, do you want to wrap us up on this reasoning topic, and then we'll jump to the next? Oh no, go ahead. I just wanted to say wrap us up on this reasoning models in agents topic here.
Yeah, I wanted to react quickly to your example, Ray. I got to try that out. I wonder why it is that as a coding assistant, some reasoning models would do very well out of the box and some would not. And yeah, to your point, Tyler, about how different are these? I think you kind of, Tyler, made the case that these are pretty different, and you also made the case that they're pretty similar. And I think that's kind of the main question: is to what extent are these things?
Yeah, that's true. I did do that.
Process. Yeah, and you brought up fine tuning. This would be a great topic for next month. Fine tuning of reasoning models is a very interesting topic that I think we know very little about right now, but it is possible. Like you said, it's not that hard to do. But what do you do? Like I know how to fine tune, say, GPT 3.5 because I tried that out. It's like you make your examples. It's pretty straightforward. Plenty of people have a lot of experience fine tuning the older generation of models. What are the considerations for this one? Like what kind of data do you need? Like how many? Where does the loss drop? I think the whole thing is like this wide open thing, and it might be very similar. It might be, it's acting as if it's just an LLM that's very smart. Or it might be totally different on some other dimension. And I'd love to know what the answer is there.
Yeah, I think they're fundamentally similar in that like the core intelligence is like the same. It's almost like you're talking to the same entity, but it has like a different preference for how it's going to use its intelligence to answer you. That's kind of how I think about the reasoning models being different. They've just been RL'd in a very particular direction, but like the base intelligence is the same thing. The way that they're different is when it comes to building product. So actually integrating them into your flow is not going to just swap one for one.
Well, actually, that's a great way to...
Okay, great.
Because the next topic of GPT 4.5, I think, has very much of the same characteristics as what you just said.
Yeah, well, do you have a hot take on that? Why don't you start us off? So the topic here is GPT 4.5. Is pre-training over? Or are we just sleeping on this model? Did people just have sticker shock? Or is it actually better? Like, do we not have good benchmarks? Like, there's a lot of open questions about GPT 4.5. To me, it felt like kind of a dud. When I looked at it and tried to use it, it felt about the same as GPT-4. Like I didn't really find any prompts that it seemed notably better on for our use cases. And it's just, 25x more expensive, or it's just it's like, this completely blows the budget massively. And so I was like, this is a big fail. But yeah, I want to hear what you guys think. And is that wrong? Is that just OpenAI has a talent issue and they just don't have the good people anymore because Ilya left or whatever? Or is it that like, pre-training is over and like the whole paradigm is kind of like we're already in the shallow part of the top of the S curve?
Well, Tyler, you're getting right to the kind of the implications of this, but why don't we dispute the premise a bit? Is GPT 4.5 actually better? You couldn't find any quick GPT-4 prompts for which you could notice a difference. And the blogs, the Twitter is full of bizarre takes of people saying it has completely different aesthetic preferences. It's a better writing assistant, almost saying everything other than evals, it's doing great. But of course, by definition, if you're saying you can't see it in evals, then who are you supposed to believe? This person on Twitter or this other person on Twitter? It kind of becomes this kind of check for yourself. And so I think that's the question, Tyler. It's kind of like with reasoning models. Is it a qualitatively different beast, or is it kind of more of what we know, but different in some sort of well-defined dimension? Because people are acting as if it's a qualitatively different beast. But if that's true, first of all, how do we know that that's true? And two, why would that be true?
Yeah, have you guys used it? Bill or Ray, have either of you guys tried it yet?
For me, like, I think to answer your question is, does it feel different? I always think back to that first moment I used GPT-4 versus 3.5 for coding. Like, wow, this is like clearly a leap. And then I think about when I started using Claude 3.0 Sonnet for the first time for code. I was like, this is clearly a leap. And then I discovered that you had to give it these nice, like, long prompts, and then it's able to do a lot more with 3.5. And so with 4.5 GPT, I've actually been giving it more writing tasks. So I actually give it a transcript of my entire like show, 3 hours, and then I feed it in as this nice long prompt, and it generates a beautiful newsletter. And I actually find it less wordy and more personal as far as the newsletter than it does compared to Claude 3.7 or Claude 3, 3.7 Sonnet. So it like I could still get away with 3.7 as far as if I had to pick one for cost, but the 4.5 feels a little bit more natural, and I've been kind of using it to write more hooks. And it seems to just take a lot of data, especially like large transcripts, and then kind of feed it in a whole bunch of parameters and instructions. My prompts are quite long for this type of tasks, but they're all written in Markdown. And I do find that the performance is really nice for writing. For code, it's just really horrible.
Yeah.
I've been using it in Windsurf, and I've been using it in Cursor, and I've been trying to just give it code examples, and I'm just really frustrated.
Yeah, it's not good at coding. It seems like the intelligence is now, we're in a domain where it's like spiky. I think like a year ago, a lot of people were talking about like, oh, these models are all just going to converge to the exact same thing, just about the training data. Like it doesn't even matter that much. It's just they're all going to become the exact same model. And the only difference is like who has better training data. So like YouTube has, Google has YouTube, so maybe they'll win or whatever. But now it feels like, I mean, maybe they do have massively different data sets and that's why, but it feels more like there's something else going on where like the intelligence is quite spiky. Like these models are really good at coding, but absolutely shit at writing. These ones are great at writing, but shit at coding, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I
go
haven't
ahead.
had a chance to play with the 4.5, but I'm sort of in the camp of like, yeah, we're probably towards like a certain steady equilibrium, If you remember ecology, there's like what's it called? Like punctuated equilibrium. So there's periods of a lot of nothing happening, and then tons of evolution will happen in a short amount of time. So I think it's like, yeah, there'll be cases where people are catching up, and it's probably data sets that are a big part of it, right? Like maybe one company can outsource and generate a bunch of coding examples, or another one will be really good at generating math examples. And then, the techniques will the heuristics or however they, clean that data, I think those will probably converge to some extent. So the data sets will definitely be different, but then, like actual breakthroughs are probably pretty relatively rare, even for how fast AI is moving. And so, like, I think basically it's like when DeepSeek came out, it's like kind of everything, the only thing people were talking about at least that weekend, and then like the stock market crashed that following Monday. Like I think like we'll know, right? Like we'll know when we hit one of those big peaks. So that's sort of my take on it. And then like in practice, right, when building product, it's like the cost is sort of the most is such a big factor, right? As well as latency. And you're not like constantly doing sweeps of like your full eval suite. So I don't know. I'm sort of just like have a little bit of fatigue with these new models.
Just wait till there's an actual innovation instead of just the daily grind of more dashes in the model name. 3.6, 3.7. Yeah, that's funny. I think I will admit that like my evals were largely vibes, and we can talk about evals. It's almost like a separate topic, but like they were largely vibes, and I feel like I was so biased against 4.5 because it's so expensive and slow. And because there's sort of like this gap in like expectation versus reality. People have been talking about, oh, what's the next big pre-training from OpenAI going to be, like GPT-5, et cetera. And so it just felt like such a disappointment already before I tried it, that I'm guessing that my vibes, and that's the problem with vibes, right? They were biased by like, I was like, oh, this thing is a big behemoth. It's so expensive. I'm never going to use this in production because it's way too slow and expensive. And so I already kind of didn't like it. And so that probably affected my opinion,
You ruined your own vibe checks.
On the side, I'm actually kind of experimenting right now. If I was just announcing this on Twitter, but I'm basically pumping in thinking tokens from DeepSeek into the 4.5 model because I have a pro plan. I could just, talk to the model as much as I want. And so I'm just trying to see if it changes its direction of what it's trying to achieve for its outcomes. And I'm really just trying to use the thinking tokens to see if I can reach into different parts of its latent space and see if it's going to give me different outputs. And what's nice about the AI SDK from like Vercel is that like, I could just grab that section of thinking tokens for all these different models and just pipe them in and just see.
Wait, can you explain that methodology, Ray? So what you're
Sure.
doing, can you just explain that? That sounds super cool, but I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, so my experiment is to pretend like the 4.5 model has a thinking model on top of it, because if they're going to use this somehow to do some type of reasoning with it, I would just feed it in like some reasoning tokens as far as the first part of the section, and then like kind of what my instructions are and any type of like metadata and stuff. And I usually have code and files in XML format. And then the very bottom part would just be my instructions or my desired outcome that I want. And then I would just put it into the model and then kind of see what happens. Then I would just take out the reasoning tokens and see kind of what happens from there. And right now I'm just doing basic features like, hey, can you just explain the data flow in my app? I just want you to generate a mermaid diagram next and see the relationships in my code and my database. And I'm just trying to see, can the model see these types of things? And then the next task I have it to do is like, can I implement a really simple feature? So can you turn this thing into light mode to dark mode, with Next.js? Because it's already really good at that. And is this going to cause a regression or not? And then I thinking it's an extensive set of tests, and I don't really have a benchmark for it, but I'm just really curious as an engineer, with and without, and then giving it the same code and see if it's going to hallucinate anything like that. And so a lot of this stuff is much easier to do. It's kind of like a Frankenstein of things. I start off with this app called Repo Prompt, and so Repo Prompt just allows me to grab all the code and everything and just put it out into like XML format, and then I just add the reasoning tokens to the top of it. So like that's kind of usually how I do this, really.
So those reasoning tokens are coming from a different model, and you're basically giving it like the non-reasoning prompt to DeepSeek. You get the reasoning tokens, and then you copy paste those into your prompt for GPT 4.5. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's a really interesting paradigm, and that's relatively easy to do. I mean, as long as latency isn't an issue, you could do that in Python. I mean, there's like through the API. That's like a real technique that I could see people actually using. That's really cool. That's good alpha.
Yeah, it's just an experiment. You never know where these things go. It could just, I don't know. I feel like there is something in the way that reasoning tokens generate information to steer the model that I don't really quite understand yet.
Yeah.
And so
I don't think anyone does, right? No one understands it.
Yeah.
For real, I'm serious. Like it's no one really knows why it does what it does.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, and I've heard of people trying to generate their own reasoning tokens from within the model, but I think this was also inspired by someone online who basically gave reasoning tokens to GPT 3.5, and they noticed like a huge leap in intelligence in that model. It's like, oh, why can't I just do that for this model too? See if there's anything there,
Interesting. It's almost like a form of distillation, but you can do it without having to like get up the whole big CPU or GPU cluster, and because distillation is like a very compute heavy process, and you have to have both models be open weights. But it's almost like you're doing inference time distillation. Yeah, that's really, really cool.
Yeah, so Ray, do you have any findings? You said you've only got 10, but how does it work so far? What does it do?
Oh, you mean as far as like how like the outcomes and stuff? I'm trying to understand, like right now it's able to implement the feature, but it misses a little bit of extra details on like another component that didn't have, like I'm using StatCN for my component system. And so I was hoping for it to pick it up, and it didn't really pick up that it had StatCN like installed, even though it's in the files and in my whole prompt structure. And I don't really know if like it should have context about that. That's what I was really confused about. And then in the reasoning, in the thinking tokens, when I was reading through them, it doesn't mention that design system. And then one of the things that I noticed separately from that is when I use Claude Code, when you do /init in Claude Code, it basically reads your data, entire code base, and actually explains that there is a design system and where those specific files are. So, like that was kind of, I haven't finished this, but like I was going to see if I include this file into the same prompt, is it going to actually change that behavior? So TBD. Like I feel like the code still feels the same, but I was going to keep pushing it further, because like my goal is to see if like, can I implement this like database, like I have a database here, and then here's the schema, and then can I add this feature here, and then can I add this, more and more features and so forth. And I was just starting off with like design. Can you read this design system without having that file specifically in the thing, and can it implement it or infer it from its like, even though it's not reasoning, can it still kind of try to get there?
Yeah, it definitely seems like a space to keep an eye on, a technique to keep an eye on, to see if anyone's able to like beat benchmarks by kind of combining these different tokens or stealing tokens from one model and giving them to the other. That's pretty cool. Okay, let's jump to the next topic, which is Claude 3.7. So I don't think Anthropic didn't actually call it Claude 3.6. People call it Claude 3.5 new, which was of all the names of AI models that have all, there's a very low bar there. That was the worst name I've ever. Claude 3.5 new. Like, what do you do? This is why we have the number after the 3 point. Like, what? So, but everyone now is just calling it 3.6 because that's what it obviously was. So, anyways, 3.7 versus 3.6. In our findings in production, we tried 3.7 and it was significantly better at certain things. It was significantly better at like giving answers to the user. So in our case, we're doing AI therapy. And so giving a good high quality answer to the user is like really important, but there's a lot of processing before that. So we found that Claude 3.7 was significantly better at giving that answer, but it was way worse at following the instructions. So we have a pretty complex prompt, and basically it was just ignoring the instructions that were like the formatting type of instructions, or like the instructions around how to actually like give us the answer in the actual tokens. It was just completely ignoring it. And like 10% of our responses in production were just like totally garbled because they weren't in the right format. And we literally had to like, we tried a second iteration where we added like a bunch of like, make sure you do it in like this XML. Like we just like kept telling it like 5 times at the beginning and at the end. And we're like, don't do this. And we even added like, don't like, make sure you don't do this or we'll like punish you. And like, we were mean to it. And it still just kept failing. Like it just wasn't good. So we just reverted back to 3.6 because it was like, wow, this is like, it felt like a more powerful entity, but like it was just less aligned, I suppose is the right way to think about it. It was just less aligned. So that was our finding. Does anyone else have findings on 3.7?
Well, I want to comment on that point because it's something that's come up on what is now Forward Pass before, that there might be a trade-off between instruction following and intelligence.
Yes.
And it's possible that 3.7 just tweaked that trade-off. That would be a strange thing to release of like, hey, look, we've got this more intelligent model, and the way we did it is by making it less likely to do what you actually tell it to do because people aren't going to use it. Just like you, Tyler, you're going to find, you know what, I'm switching back to the old one.
Yeah.
So it might be a coincidence, or it might just be that that was only one data point. If it is actually worse, I think that would be more of an update that this really is a thing. There is a fundamental trade-off between intelligence and following instructions, which again feels like more that it wouldn't be a fundamental thing. It's just kind of a property of current systems, but maybe there is something deeper going on there.
Well, isn't that a thing in humans? I mean, aren't stupid people easier to steer? I don't know. Sorry, that was me.
Yeah.
We'll remove that one in post.
Yeah. That one's we'll save that one for Forward Pass Night Edition with whiskeys. But I think it has come up a number of times, right, where we're like, well, you know, they call it this nice, neat number like Claude 3.7 or something, but underneath the hood, who knows what it is, right? It could be on Ensemble, it could be different systems of different layers. It's just really hard to know what's actually changed, right? Like, it's not even clear it's a fundamental, intelligence question. It could just be, it's just reweighting things, right? And we would just not, there's no way to know unless you did like an eval.
I see. Wow. Well, I'm curious. I don't know if you guys seen this. There's this, I think in OpenAI, they were talking, there's this, I think somewhere in the documentation, they were talking about this like architecture where you would feed in a question for this deep research type of thing. And like a GPT-4o model could kind of like ask more questions and gather this stuff. And then you have basically an O reasoning model that's basically going over and sort of doing RAG on your data. And then they had this other chain that has like a verification chain as well, doing with an O reasoning model as well. And so, the stuff will come into like a GPT-4o model, ask more questions, and then pipe it off to these different areas of architecture, and then finally come back with the results that's verified by a reasoning model. And my thinking here is that like, is Claude like doing some type of reasoning and thinking, and if they don't actually have a definite answer, they kind of steer you away, just for the sake of safety instead of steering you into a hallucination type of thing. And then so, they don't really talk about that, but I don't know. That's kind of my guess, right? Like we think it's intelligent, but maybe it's just not giving you the answer and just saying, this is what I got without saying this is what I got and just being very confident about it. I don't know. I'm also perplexed because I was using it for coding, like with Cursor. Now that's where I got really frustrated. It's like, I'm just going to go back to 3.5 and everything worked fine. And it saved me more.
It seems overeager, right? It was like, I saw a funny tweet that was like, Claude 3.5, you tell it to like do a thing and it kind of just like does the thing, but it's like very constrained. And then you tell 3.7 and it's just like, I'm going to create a new B2B SaaS app for you. It's just like doing too much. I'm like, it seems cool. And in a few cases, it's been really helpful. Like I had this like complex AWS bug where it basically just gave me like this series of terminal commands. And it was just like, now run this one. And then it would use the outputs of each of those to then gather information. It was like, oh, I see what's going on. Because of that AWS CLI command that you just ran, I now see that the issue is like with your like security group or whatever. Like it was kind of an important thing that I needed to fix. And then it was like, here's the command to fix it. And it was all just in there. I was like, that's a new paradigm that I haven't seen before. Because before it was kind of like 3.5, for example, or 3 would just like give you an answer, but it didn't have this concept of like, I'm going to figure out what I need to know to figure out the answer and then ask you to run that and then use the output of that to then. So I thought like that was really powerful. But I've seen it doing kind of a similar attempt of that in other ways where it then just gets lost. It's like, oh, I'm going to search your code base for all the examples of this, but it's like, there are no examples of that because I haven't done that before, and then it just gets lost, like trying to figure out an example of it in my code base that doesn't exist. And then it's just like, gets really confused. So it's like, it seems like the same instinct in the model, but like in some cases, it just like, doesn't know when to apply it, I guess, properly, but seems powerful once they get that kind of under control.
Yeah, it reminds me of well, whatever happened to browser control. That was like a thing for a hot minute.
What's that?
Or the idea was like you just give up, like, in accessibility, you can like let applications control your cursor and your keyboard.
Got it.
And then just give that to the AI and like hope for the best, right? And then they run, they do stuff to your screen directly, or to your code or to your browser. And I don't know if anything came of that. It was a fun idea at the time, maybe a little scary, but it's a kind of what you were saying was reminding me of that, where it like can take actions on your behalf, right? Because like instead of you having to type in that like crazy incantation of like AWS CLI commands, it should just be able to do it and just like tell you what it figured out.
Yeah, although like changing my security groups without me, like that's sketchy, right? And that's why I listed that as an example, because I was like, wow, this is like a serious command that it's running here. Like this is important. And I verified it. It was correct, but like I was like, I don't think I want this to be running without me in the loop here.
Yeah. That was the same thing a lot of people had reservations with. Or like, what is it gonna do? Like, I don't know. It could do a bunch of stuff, and like it would be invisible, right? Because it could switch, it could hide it, it could do it in the background, and you would never know, and you would be hard pressed to detect it after the fact.
Well, okay, last topic for the day is, Ray, you want to talk about 11 Labs and voice transcribing and the accuracy around that?
Yeah, so it's something I've been playing around with that I'm really curious now. So 11 Labs released this thing called Scribe, and they're claiming it's the world's most accurate speech-to-text model. And I'm really curious about using this specifically for like medicine and for law use cases because of people documenting things, collecting stuff over the phone or whatever they're doing, just to have a log. And I've just been playing around with the diarization stuff, and it's really, really cool. I need to actually talk to some more clients about it as far as figuring out, is this actually going to be, really useful for their use cases? And I was curious about you, Tyler, as well, because you guys have something going on with like mental, where people like speak to it. And I'm actually curious from your standpoint, like, does the accuracy of what is specifically said more important, or like the tone, like you talked about Hume as well, where Hume can detect like, like all these extra features in the voice that aren't necessarily speech to text, but just more of like emotion in describing these types of things.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with 11 Labs Scribe. It's pretty new. I haven't looked at their docs recently.
It just came out like this last 5 days ago. Yeah.
Okay. So is it just like more accurate? I mean, I've personally found that like Whisper Large is like so close to perfect that it doesn't really matter. Now, mostly we're testing in English. I think we have a very small subset of our users using other languages, but almost everyone's in English. So it could be a bias with English, and maybe this other one's better at other languages. I don't know. But like, I personally feel like speech to text in particular is like a solved problem. Like it's better than I would do, or is like as good as I would do if I was sitting there listening, because I would get some words wrong if I was listening to someone too.
Yeah.
So it's basically like it's human level or above.
More language
with Whisper Large. So I'm not sure where like the alpha really is in that particular domain. Maybe I'm understanding it. Yeah.
more languages and basically just be able to pick up like almost like 30 plus speakers at the same time, all talking over each other and then doing the
I
conversation
see. Oh,
basically.
wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that is a big. Oh, I see. I see. Interesting. Okay, that does seem important, actually. Yeah, because Whisper just gives you a single kind of output that's just like, text. It's not necessarily broken up by speaker. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So for our AI therapy at the moment, we don't have like we're not doing like group therapy or couples therapy yet. And so I think that could be an interesting use case if it's able to detect different speakers differently. That seems important. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. We haven't tried it yet though, because basically when it comes to like single speaker in English without like massive background noise, like that is a solved problem in terms of transcription. As far as we can tell, it's like basically perfect.
Yeah, I was looking at it like from an ER room perspective because there are like
Right.
several doctors and people who are rattling off, and also curious for more medical terms. I'm not really sure how good it is
Mhm.
at that specifically and if it can get that
Right.
pretty accurately. Given its high, percentage rate, I'm really curious to kind of dig into that a little bit more because I know an anesthesiologist who asked me about that, saying, "Hey, if you can nail this problem, like this is just something that would just save so much time afterwards for people having to write this down." As far as what they gave the patients with all these different medications for anesthesia.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else have thoughts on transcription or voice type of stuff?
I mean, maybe this is something we discussed before as well. I think like it's sort of towards your point, Tyler, the like accuracy is kind of hitting a wall. A lot of it will be like latency and then things like that happen frequently in natural language, like interruptions or people talking over each other. And those are going to be a lot more meaningful, especially if you're thinking about building like an AI therapy app. Like those are, part of language in a lot of ways, right? It's not just like the actual content, it's also how you say it and the how it layers with how someone else is say it and like the latency, like how long do you pause before you respond. So I think for the product side, a lot of that will matter a lot more increasingly than just the strictly the accuracy.
Yep. Yep. I agree. I think we're already at the like her moment from like an intelligence perspective in terms of the LLM intelligence. I don't think we're quite at the her moment in terms of, I think, two things. One is like the quality of the voice and the nuance of the voice. That would be more like text to speech, I suppose, the actual output voice. I don't think we're quite there yet on that, although it's getting closer. And then I think the biggest thing with that is memory. So no one solved like, if you want to have a relationship with this thing, like it needs to really remember you. So that's something we're working on at Mental, but I think it's an open problem that, there's all kinds of simple solutions like OpenAI just like has some tiny model that's just running and being like, is this worth remembering or something? And then if it is, it outputs like a sentence. And then that like list of sentences that it's built up just gets into the prompt every time. It's like very primitive. I mean, that kind of memory is obviously possible right now. But like the deep memory of like understanding who you are and your motivations, like at a deeper level, even things that you haven't explicitly said. Because as a human, you build a concept of someone that's like much more nuanced. Like a person doesn't have to say, I get aggressive sometimes when I'm hungry or whatever, but like that's just like something you know about them because you observe it, right? And so that's the kind of memory that I think is just not right now. It's just not there. But
Just
I
to
think
throw a
that's
wrench
like
into
kind of the
this,
block. Yeah, go ahead.
how does TikTok know you to serve what you want to see just from like a couple flicks, right? Like,
Mm.
is that a form of memory? And it seems that they've sort of cracked it in terms of getting you to stay on to use their app and get people addicted, right? Or is it just literally just addiction that's driving this? Or do they have to know who you are because of that? I have lots of questions. Yeah.
Good question. I think it is a form of memory for sure. I think the difference there is that the set of things that they can like ultimately the only question they have to answer is like what's the next video to show? And that's like just a much more constrained question. It's like a much more constrained space of outputs than like what do I say next? Like that's just a much more combinatorially explosive like result. So I would say that's like the main difference in my mind and why like we've solved one but not the other.
They also have a like a huge advantage is they have a very clear engagement metric, which is how long you're looking at the video. And then I'm sure they have lots of other ones, but things that are more subtle, like AI therapy, like you might not find out if your client hates you for like many sessions, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's like a lot of advantages where you can just say like, okay, well, if you engage with this for 3 seconds, then you're like very similar to people who also engaged with it for 3 seconds. So you'll probably like these ones that they engage with for 10 seconds, right? Or however long people look at TikToks.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like you're able to do more like this person is similar to this other person because the output space is just like videos. That person's watched other videos, so you can just kind of pattern. It's basically clustering. You're just clustering people. Whereas like with something more nuanced, like a long-term relationship or like AI girlfriend or whatever, like you can't just cluster. You know what I mean? It's just like way more nuanced than that. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a
Or
lot
the
of
clusters
interesting.
are get so small. The clusters are like you're much more towards the edges rather towards the middle.
Yeah, there's certainly patterns across different types of people, but like ultimately the cluster gets so small that it just each cluster has one person in it. You know what I mean? It's like it's no longer clustering is no longer a good technique.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, yeah. Did you guys want to wrap up on kind of like how people are staying up to date on everything with everything moving so fast? I feel like that's always the top of mind for anyone in this space. Like, how do we even decide? I think you kind of touched on it, Michael. Of like, I just ignore like a lot of these new releases and just keep building. That's, I think, a good approach, an approach people probably don't take often enough. They're like, I gotta know what the newest thing is. Like, refresh the 35 more tweets, you know?
Yep. I'm an AI boomer for sure. Just doesn't matter. Everything that was good was invented in 2023.
That's funny. All right. Well, that was great. That was the first episode of the Forward Pass. I hope you guys liked it. Yeah. See you back here next month.
See ya.
Should we introduce our yeah.
Oh, shit. I forgot. Fuck. I'm a bad moderator. All right. We're not cutting anything. This is all going in the final cut.
This is
Okay.
live.
I'm Tyler. I worked at Calm for a long time. I was the first engineer at Calm and built them up to being a big meditation app. A couple of years ago, I started my own mental health app company with a friend of mine from Calm, and we're now building an AI therapist. And we currently, we've talked to a lot of folks out there, and we currently think we have the world's best AI therapist. So you can find it at getmental.com. getmental.com. And yeah, so when you hear me talking on this podcast, you'll know that the problem that I'm thinking most about when it comes to LLMs and the reason I'm researching them is in order to figure out how to build a better AI therapist.
Cool. I'll jump in. I don't have a nice pitch at all, but I'm Michael. I've been
No
working
plug, no
on
plug, Michael. Where's your plug? You
no
got to have a
Plug. I
plug.
want
no
something.
plug. Yeah, you can't find it. Batteries only. That didn't make sense. But anyways, I'm a software engineer. I've been working in a lot of different small startups that reach different sizes. I'm currently working at Log10. We're working on I don't know how you would even describe this more, but like healthcare regulation is sort of the area we're looking at. AI applications for it, especially. Turns out there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of workflows that are pretty onerous, but might be a good fit for AI. So we're exploring that area.
Dan, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. This voice that you're hearing right now is me. I'm Dan Schwartz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Future Search. We're a seed stage company building an AI forecaster to predict the future.
Very modest goal.
Yeah.
All right, Ray, close us out.
Cool. My name is Ray Fernando, and I'm an influencer now. Just kidding. Yeah, I used to be an engineer at Apple and worked a lot on a lot of things from low level things to kernel level to user space to design and engineering and blending all these two worlds together. I was there for over 12 years, and now I'm basically on my own and making apps and exploring things and trying to use these LLMs in real life for real life things. I'd say a lot of my specialty now focuses on user experiences and trying to understand how we can make apps using these models and kind of blend the world of like humanity meeting these really technical problems. And so the space that I've started to get into just through live streaming has just been through audio. So I have an app called Ray Transcribe, so you can go check it out. And just exploring this space kind of from that angle. And I do a lot of live streaming and code streaming, kind of playing around when these new models drop and so forth. I use the media stuff to kind of keep me moving and up to date at things. This podcast here that we meet once a month kind of helps us get together and talk about these different topics. And yeah, this is kind of what I do.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Anyone who got this far, gold star for you. Yeah. See you next month.
So yeah.
Bye.